Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep on Lucretius and his epic poem De Rerum Natura, which translates to On the Nature of Things. We know you're a philosopher, so we'll explore this work with that in mind, uh, you know, focusing on the key arguments and why it still intrigues philosophers like you even today.
It's a truly remarkable work, and a challenging one. It's this blend of poetry and philosophy, which might seem ironic, considering that Epicurus, the philosopher whose ideas Lucretius is championing, was actually quite critical of poetry.
Yeah, it does seem a bit like a contradiction, right? Like, why would Lucretius choose poetry to lay out this philosophical system?
Well, one theory is that Lucretius saw the power of poetry to make difficult ideas more accessible, engaging. Think of it as a spoonful of sugar to help the philosophical medicine go down, so to speak.
I like that. And what's the medicine Lucretius is offering?
At the heart of De Rerum Natura is a comprehensive kind of exposition of Epicurean philosophy, a school of thought that emphasized understanding the natural world as the key to achieving peace of mind. And Lucretius starts by laying out the foundation of this philosophy, the idea that everything in the universe is made up of atoms and void.
Like the classic building blocks of the universe. But as a philosopher, the concept of atoms has been around since the pre-Socratics. So what makes Lucretius's atomism stand out?
Lucretius goes beyond just asserting that atoms exist. He delves into their nature, their properties, how their interactions create the world around us. He argues that atoms are eternal and indivisible, each with its own shape and size and weight, constantly moving and colliding in the void, the empty space that allows for their movement. And crucially, he emphasizes that nothing can be created from nothing, and nothing can be utterly destroyed. Everything we see changing is simply a rearrangement of these fundamental building blocks.
So he's offering a purely materialist explanation for the universe and everything in it. No need for divine intervention or supernatural forces.
Exactly. And this has some pretty profound implications, particularly for how Lucretius addresses the nature of the soul and our fear of death, topics that have preoccupied philosophers for centuries.
So how does this concept of atoms and void lead to Lucretius's view of the soul?
Well, if everything in the universe is made of atoms, then the soul must be too, right? Lucretius argues that the soul, which he divides into the animus and anima, is made up of incredibly fine, mobile atoms, intricately kind of intertwined with the body.
So no ethereal, immortal soul floating off to some heavenly realm.
Not according to Lucretius. He argues that the soul is material and dependent on the body for its existence. When the body dies, the soul dissolves along with it.
Now this brings us to the fear of death, something that Lucretius addresses directly. How does his atomistic view of the soul inform his approach to this universal human fear?
He makes a really interesting argument, what's called the symmetry argument. He points out that we don't fear the time before we were born, so why should we fear the non-existence after death? Death, he argues, is simply the absence of sensation, a return to the state we were in before we were born. It's not something to be feared because, in essence, we cease to be.
That's a pretty bold statement, especially considering the prevailing religious beliefs of his time, which often emphasized an afterlife.
It definitely was a challenge to conventional thinking. And this leads us to another key aspect of Lucretius's philosophy, the concept of the swerve, or kleinomen.
Okay, I've heard a bit about this. It's this idea that atoms don't just move in straight lines, right? They occasionally and randomly swerve.
That's right. Lucretius proposes that atoms, in their constant motion, sometimes deviate from their paths in a completely random and unpredictable way.
I'm curious, as a philosopher, what do you make of this swerve? Doesn't it seem to contradict the very idea of a deterministic universe governed by the laws of physics?
It's definitely a head-scratcher. And you're not alone in wondering how this seemingly random element fits into a system that otherwise seems to be based on the predictable movements of atoms. Lucretius uses the swerve to address a couple of huge philosophical questions, starting with the formation of the universe itself.
How does the swerve explain the universe's creation?
Lucretius argues that without the swerve, atoms would just move in parallel lines, never colliding, never forming the complex structures that make up the universe. The swerve, he says, is what introduces the possibility of collisions and interactions, allowing for the formation of everything from stars and planets to plants and animals.
So it's like a cosmic game of billiards, where the swerve is that unexpected bank shot that changes the entire game.
Exactly. And this brings us to the second major implication of the swerve, free will.
Ah, free will. The perennial philosophical puzzle. How does Lucretius connect the swerve to this thorny issue?
Lucretius argues that if atoms just moved predictably, everything would be predetermined. including our own actions. However, the random swerve introduces an element of chance and unpredictability, allowing for the possibility of free will.
So the swerve gives us a little wiggle room, huh? A chance to break free from determinism, at least according to Lucretius.
Precisely. It's like the swerve injects freedom into an otherwise deterministic system. Of course, the debate over free will continues to this day, and Lucretius's argument certainly doesn't settle it. But it's a fascinating and thought-provoking contribution. And this brings us to another area where Lucretius challenges conventional thinking. His view of the gods.
Right, Lucretius and the Epicureans had a unique take on the divine. They didn't exactly deny the existence of gods, did they?
No, they didn't deny their existence outright, but they argued that the gods, if they exist, are indifferent to human affairs. They dwell in a state of perfect tranquility, detached from the world and unconcerned with our actions.
So no need to pray to them for favors or fear their wrath.
Exactly. Lucretius argues that a true understanding of the gods should actually liberate us from fear and anxiety. He believed that much of human suffering stems from our belief that the gods intervene in our lives, rewarding or punishing us based on their whims.
So he's advocating for a kind of enlightened atheism.
You could say that. He's not denying the existence of gods, but he's saying that even if they do exist, we shouldn't base our lives around them. Instead, he urges us to focus on understanding the natural world and living in accordance with nature.
And this focus on understanding the natural world leads us to Lucretius's account of the development of civilization. What's his take on how humans went from primitive hunter-gatherers to the complex societies of his time?
Lucretius presents a completely naturalistic account of human progress, devoid of any divine intervention. He argues that early humans were initially solitary and robust, facing the challenges of nature head-on. They didn't have the comforts and complexities of civilization, but they also didn't have the anxieties and conflicts that accompany them.
So it's that classic philosophical trope of the noble savage.
Not quite. Lucretius doesn't romanticize primitive life. He acknowledges the harsh realities, their constant struggle for survival, but he also points out that they were free from ambition, greed, and the pursuit of power.
Interesting. So how does he explain the shift from this simple existence to the more complex social structures of civilization?
Lucretius traces the development of civilization through key discoveries and innovations, all of which he attributes to human ingenuity and necessity, not divine guidance. The discovery of fire, for example, provided warmth, protection, and the ability to cook food. The development of agriculture allowed for a more settled way of life, and the invention of language facilitated communication and cooperation.
So he's presenting a kind of proto-evolutionary theory showing how humans adapted to their environment and developed new technologies to meet their needs.
Exactly. And as societies became more complex, so did the challenges they faced. Lucretius argues that the rise of cities, while bringing benefits like trade and specialization, also introduced new forms of conflict, inequality, and social unrest.
This idea that progress isn't always linear, that it often comes with a cost, seems particularly relevant today.
Absolutely. Lucretius's insights into the complexities of human civilization and the trade-offs between progress and its unintended consequences offer a timeless perspective on the challenges we face even today. And speaking of progress, Lucretius also delves into the development of language, offering a purely naturalistic explanation for its origins.
That's right. I'm always fascinated by these ancient attempts to explain the seemingly miraculous ability we have to communicate through words. What's Lucretius' take on this?
Lucretius argues that language arose naturally from the sounds humans instinctively make, combined with the practical need to communicate and refer to objects. He suggests that early humans began by mimicking the sounds of nature, gradually associating these sounds with specific objects and actions.
So no divine intervention in the creation of language, according to Lucretius.
None whatsoever. He firmly believed that language, like everything else in the universe, evolved naturally over time. And this brings us to another crucial aspect of Epicurean philosophy, and one that often gets misinterpreted: the role of pleasure.
Right. Epicureanism is sometimes associated with hedonism, the idea that pleasure is the ultimate good. How does Lucretius address this?
Lucretius, following Epicurus, certainly believed that pleasure is important, but he distinguished between types of pleasure. He argued that true pleasure is not about fleeting sensory indulgences or the endless pursuit of material wealth. Instead, he emphasized the pleasure that comes from living a life of moderation, tranquility, and understanding.
So it's about finding a balance between enjoying life's pleasures and avoiding the excess that leads to pain and suffering.
Exactly. Remember the opening of Book 2, where Lucretius describes the pleasure of a mind at peace? He's essentially saying that the greatest pleasure comes from understanding the world, mastering our desires, and living in accordance with nature. He even critiques the pursuit of fame, wealth, and power, arguing that these things don't lead to genuine happiness.
This idea of finding peace of mind through understanding the natural world seems to be a recurring theme in Lucretius's work.
It certainly is, and this focus on nature is also evident in his descriptions of natural phenomena, from thunder and lightning to earthquakes and volcanoes.
I have to admit, I found his descriptions of these often terrifying events beautiful and even calming. It's like he finds a way to make the power of nature less frightening and more understandable.
That's a great point. Lucretius emphasizes that these events, while seemingly chaotic and destructive, are not expressions of divine wrath or punishment. They're simply the result of natural processes, governed by the laws of physics.
So instead of fearing these events, we can appreciate them as manifestations of the universe's underlying atomic structure.
Precisely. And he even offers multiple explanations for certain phenomena, acknowledging that our understanding of the natural world is always evolving. And there may be multiple ways to account for what we observe. One particularly striking example of his descriptive power and his willingness to confront the harsher realities of life is his account of the Athenian plague. That concludes Book 6.
Right, that's a chilling and unforgettable passage. He doesn't hold back in depicting the horrors of the plague, the suffering and death it inflicts.
It's a stark reminder of our own mortality, but it also serves a philosophical purpose.
How so?
He's not simply trying to shock or horrify his readers, he's using the plague as a way to illustrate the fragility of life and the importance of living wisely. He's saying, look, this is the reality. We are all vulnerable to disease, decay, and death, so let's make the most of the time we have.
It's a powerful message, and one that resonates even today, especially in a world that often tries to shield us from the realities of suffering and death. So how does this focus on the plague connect to the broader themes of Epicurean philosophy?
Remember, the goal of Epicureanism is to achieve ataraxia, a state of peace and tranquility. And one of the biggest obstacles to achieving this is the fear of death. By confronting the reality of death head-on, by describing its horrors in detail, Lucretius is trying to help us overcome that fear.
It's almost like a kind of exposure therapy for our anxieties about death. By staring it in the face, we can hopefully learn to live with it, and maybe even find a way to live more fully in the present.
Exactly. And this brings us to the legacy of Lucretius and the enduring relevance of his work, especially for someone like you, a philosopher grappling with these huge questions about life, death, and the nature of reality. What do you think, as a philosopher, are some of the most compelling aspects of Lucretius's philosophy?
Well, for me, it's Lucretius's commitment to a purely materialist explanation of the universe. That's a bold stance to say that everything, even our minds and souls, are ultimately reducible to atoms and their interactions.
It's a radical idea for sure, and one that continues to challenge us today. I mean, think about the implications for consciousness. If our minds are simply the product of material processes, does that mean free will is an illusion? Does it change how we think about moral responsibility?
Big questions. And I think Lucretius would be thrilled that we're still wrestling with them.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating is how his materialism leads to this incredibly insightful analysis of human nature. He's not afraid to point out our flaws, our anxieties, our tendency toward excess, but he also offers a path towards peace and fulfillment, not through divine intervention or otherworldly promises, but through understanding the world around us and our place in it.
And that's where his discussion of pleasure and pain becomes so crucial. It's not about indulging every fleeting desire or accumulating material possessions. It's about understanding the nature of true pleasure, the kind that comes from living a life of moderation, tranquility, and knowledge.
It's a message that seems so relevant today, where we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to consume more, achieve more, and strive for this idea of happiness that often feels just out of reach.
Absolutely. And that's why I think Lucretius is so valuable. He's a reminder that the pursuit of happiness isn't about chasing external things. It's about cultivating inner peace through understanding the natural world and living in harmony with it.
And his insights into the development of civilization, how human ingenuity leads to both progress and new forms of suffering, feel incredibly prescient today. In our age of technological advancement and its unintended consequences, it makes you wonder, what would Lucretius make of our modern world, with all its complexities and challenges?
I think he'd be both fascinated and maybe a bit dismayed. He might see our technological advancements as a testament to human ingenuity, But he'd probably caution us about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the pursuit of more. He'd probably remind us that true happiness isn't found in gadgets or status, but in cultivating a life of simple pleasures, intellectual curiosity, and appreciation for the natural world.
Yeah, he might even suggest that our modern obsession with social media is a form of the very anxieties that he warned about, like a distraction from the true path to tranquility.
Exactly. He'd probably encourage us to put down our phones, step outside, and reconnect with the natural world.
So for you, what is Lucretius's most lasting contribution? What makes Rerum Natura so compelling after all these centuries?
I think it's his belief in the power of human reason to understand the world and our place in it. He doesn't shy away from the big questions. He tackles them head on, offering this vision of the universe that is both awe-inspiring and comforting in its simplicity.
And he does it all in this beautiful poetry that brings his ideas to life, in a way that no dry philosophical treatise ever could. He reminds us that philosophy isn't just about abstract concepts and logical arguments. It's about understanding what it means to be human, to live a good life, and to find meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and indifferent.
And he offers us a path towards that understanding, not through faith or dogma, but through observation, critical thinking, and a deep appreciation for the natural world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Lucretius, I think we can all agree that his work offers so many insights for philosophers and anyone seeking a deeper understanding of themselves and the universe. And perhaps his most important lesson is this: the pursuit of peace and happiness begins with understanding the true nature of things, from the smallest atom to the vast expanse of the cosmos.
Well said. And who knows, maybe by grappling with Lucretius's ideas, we can all find a bit more tranquility in our own lives.
I think that's a great place to end our exploration of Lucretius. We encourage you to read Rerum Natura yourself and see what resonates with you. You might be surprised by how relevant his ideas feel, even today. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep into the world of ideas.